Hello, I'm Scruffy.
And hello, I'm Austin Wintory, and thank you, Scruffy, for letting me steal your format for this one. For those who are discovering this video by coming here from Scruffy's video, I'm Austin Wintory, I'm a composer. These days I tend to specialize in video games, but I've worked on film, I've written concert pieces, all that fun stuff. I've done games like this one, and these. And I like to think that I'm professionally curious about music. I'm kind of stealing a paraphrase from Malcolm Gladwell with that, but what I mean is, for me, music is this great frontier of exploration, and I absolutely love that, especially games give me the opportunity to push into that frontier and try things that I've never done, and not just musically experiment, but actually, and I know this probably sounds cheesy, literally grow as a person as a result. Anyway, onto the subject of today. You are hopefully watching this because you saw Scruffy's channel and his amazing video about Abzu. For right now, there's a few last things that Scruffy and I are going to get into regarding Abzu, and from there we're going to pivot into Giant Squid's newest game that I've had the great pleasure of working on. So thanks for checking this out. This is Crafting the Familiar New for the Pathless.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor to collaborate with you. And it was fun crafting a video analyzing your work on Abzu. I learned a lot from exploring how you work with melody, how you orchestrate, and how you implement this all into a game. So in Abzu, you create a lot of musical material off this small sequence of pitches that emulate the motion of water. And you use blending, you use harp ensemble, and various integrated electronic effects to give the music the same surreal touch that the visuals have. It's quite a unique sound world.
I appreciate the kind words. I will add that I wouldn't actually say the goal was to directly emulate the sound or the feel of the ocean itself, or even things like schools of fish or kelp forests, that kind of thing. It was really about the emotion. The word you used, surreal, is honestly the best one. Honestly, I think my main goal was to just do justice to the game, to capture what Matt Nava and Giant Squid were trying to do. And what I think they were trying to do was to make something that was emotional and evocative and even a tad bit political, to the extent that you might label conservationism political. I don't think the game tries to hide that aspect to it, but it does it in a very allegorical way. It does it in a way that makes it about sort of life in a pure sense and in an abstract sense. It's obviously not a commentary on our literal oceans or ecosystems. It's an exploration through a kind of hypothetical scenario in a way. But it's also pure and sort of Joseph Campbell-esque. To that extent, it's just telling a universal story, irrespective of anything to do with something specific like ocean conservation. And needless to say, the score, it was trying to keep up with all of that.
I wanted to ask specifically about the harps. There's 7 harps arranged in a wide stereo spectrum, and whenever they play, they have a lot of freedom over their rhythm. I was wondering where you got the idea for that sound. Did it just come from the motion of water, or was there someone specific you listened to get that idea?
So I've always loved when orchestras do these aleatoric gestures and you get a small number of pitches but overlapping in so many successive ways that it creates a kind of beehive or school of fish. And I suppose it was possibly a subconscious internalization of the notion of a school of fish, but the fact that 7 harps can create such a huge swarm of notes was very appealing. I think it's a sound I naturally loved anyway. Wagner has used large amounts of harps, and even there's a score I listened to as a kid by Bernard Herrmann called Beneath the 12-Mile Reef, which he uses a bunch of harps, which is hilarious because I had completely forgotten about that score, and then someone after Abzu came out pointed out that a deep sea film score had already kind of leaned on a harp ensemble. And then when I went back and listened to it to see if I'd somehow accidentally been a little too inspired, the results of how we used those ensembles couldn't have been more different, so I chalk it up to subconscious absorption.
A big part of Abzu's soundtrack is the creation myth that inspired the game. The Enuma Elish gave you not only the names for the tracks, but lyrical material for the choir, and a sense of what Abzu is really about. What was your connection to the myth while you worked on the soundtrack?
So the Enuma Elish is something that came straight from Matt Nava. I don't know if reading that is what inspired Abzu as a game from the beginning, or if it was something that he was kind of more generally playing with, and then that text helped him focus in on. I really don't know. I just know that one of the first times he told me anything about the game, he read to me those words, and so they just stuck with me through the process. And then, of course, naturally, as soon as I started using choir, I just had to set it. Of course, finding how to pronounce the original Akkadian was its own research project, but there was never any question of using the text. There was something about that text as well that I think it shares with probably all creation texts, religious texts. It gives us a little glimpse into ourselves. There's a curiosity about it, which, like I mentioned a minute ago, is something very central to myself. That need to see what's over the next hill or under the next rock or at the bottom of that valley, etc., etc. It's a human instinct. And these kinds of myths that represent a group of people trying to make sense of the world and taking their best stab at answering these big existential questions have always been very evocative to me. Plus, I love the idea of narrativizing what now would get folded into the domain of science. The idea of trying to not just lay it down in a clinical way or in an empirical way, which of course I would always be the first to say is hugely important, but to try to tell that same information through a story. I've always resonated with that, and I love these early, ancient attempts at doing so. So any game that lets me go there and explore that is one I'm just instantly excited to be working on.
So, in a broader sense, what kind of games or what kind of narratives do you like to score?
I suppose I jumped the gun on this one and already answered it, but any game that lets me explore these kind of deep, mythic archetypes is something that I love. But the truth is, my own general curiosity makes me want to score all types of games. I mean, from the ridiculous comedies to the massive epics to these poetic explorations of life itself, to just sitting and trying to solve puzzles. Honestly, I love it all, and I love the variety, and I love the different things that each of those forces me to kind of explore and experiment with. Plus, I think if I were to only do projects like this, I'd emotionally drain myself because they take a lot out of me to do. All of that said, I can't deny how meaningful it is to me to explore these big themes. A game like Journey was such a privilege because it tackled the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's so-called monomyth, head on. It was very meditative in nature, but it was meditative about life, about huge questions, and I got to really explore big sonic landscapes in a way that was hopefully simultaneously very intimate. Shortly after Journey came out, I was asked to work on a franchise called the Banner Saga, which was a trilogy of games inspired by Norse mythology, but was at its heart about accepting your fate. It was about accepting death and about accepting mortality and the fragility of life. It was a game where the heroes were not trying to figure out how to save the world so much as to confront the end of the world with dignity. And tackling that was something musically that I think really changed me. Well, I think that's one of the truly beautiful things about games. And it's also a wonderful answer to those that are quick to dismiss them as just explosions and shooty guns or dude bros or whatever else. Games are many, many things, and there are many, many game designers and interactive storytellers out there who are looking for ways to use this medium to co-author experiences with the players that let them explore their own lives, their own emotions, their own philosophies. It's amazing. To be part of that kind of thing is something I never expected when I was getting into this. I was probably guilty of that same reductive attitude about games. I thought, oh, they are all about excitement and adrenaline. And beginning with Genova Chen when we were students at USC and starting work on Flow, I quickly realized they can be so much more.
I'm seeing a pattern in these stories of coming to terms with yourself, your own struggles, and finding where you fit in a large, lofty world. So, what is the Pathless? Can you reveal a bit about how the gameplay would work, or at least how it would differ from Abzu?
So, The Pathless is Giant Squid's new game, and it's a beautiful kind of next step in the evolution of Matt Nava as a game designer, if I may say so. It has a lot in common with Abzu and Journey and Flower before it, but it also represents a far more kinetic, sort of, dare I say, action-packed game experience. It follows the story of a young hunter who arrives on an island and discovers a dark curse, and her story trying to kind of unravel what's going on there and maybe try to stop it. I'm going to leave plot details intentionally vague, but I will say that the game's mechanics, unlike the purely navigational and explorational feel of a game like Abzu, is that plus this absolutely beautifully refined archery mechanic. And you can read about that a bit actually on Giant Squid's blog. They've been remarkably open and transparent during the development process, which I guess explains why we're doing this video now before the game has even come out.
In the case of Abzu, it was all about conveying sublimity. The ocean is sublime, it's vast, it's majestic, it's timeless, and it was about this diver finding her connection, her place in this sublime ocean. So, to the question we posed in the last video, is The Pathless, and by extension your music for it, also going to be sublime?
That feels like a trick question because sublimity, to me, is a quality judgment or a value judgment on something. It evokes the sublime is to say that it evokes something within you so serene and heavenly and transcendent. And that's towering praise. So I should say that I think all of my music, on some level, aspires to the sublime. Though I think in the spirit that you mean, of something that feels kind of connected to these larger themes, connected to the next world, as it were, or the next life. Pathless, I would say, is actually far more concerned with the here and now. It's a far more gritty and folk-sounding score that's rooted in these very human instrument-type sounds. The orchestra has evolved as a music-making construct over the years, that it can take on a kind of ethereal quality. It can feel otherworldly, especially, I think, strings and voices together. That's part of why I use them that way in Abzu, is it doesn't feel human. I think it's the same reason why it seems to work in a score like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. It doesn't remind us of our day-to-day lives. On the other hand, there's a whole host of instruments that I think do remind us of our day-to-day life. And so, needless to say, Pathless is far more anchored in those than the traditional orchestra. But there is traditional orchestra, so hopefully I don't sound like I'm already contradicting myself. Of course, the best thing to do is just, I think, let the music speak for itself. So here is a taste of the theme.
It sounds brilliant. Right off the bat, it throws some new sounds at us. There's this contrast between a small character and a large backdrop, and it's honestly beckoning. I want to go on this adventure.
Well, I guess I can't ask for more than that.
I hear quite a few instruments in this theme that aren't in your everyday symphony orchestra. Could you elaborate on those?
The short answer to that is that the score leans heavily on an instrument called nyckelharpa. It's a Swedish version of the violin in a way. I like to call it the steampunk violin because it operates through these mechanical keys instead of by fingering the neck like you would on most all other string instruments. Morgan O'Shaughnessy is the musician there. He's a featured performer in the score. There's also a huge number of kind of near and far eastern wind instruments played by my endlessly recurring collaborator Kristen Nagus, who was also the oboist on Abzu. There's quite a lot of double bass solos played by the wonderful Eric Snoza. There are quite a few more than those, but I'll leave it there for now. However, at the heart of it all is this amazing group from Tuva near Mongolia called the Alash Ensemble. and they all play Tuvan instruments, and they sing in the Tuvan throat singing tradition, and they're absolutely superb. You can find them online. If you just Google throat singing, chances are they are who will come up. They even gave a TED Talk about it. They're spectacular musicians, and we can talk in all sorts of depth about working with them, but that's kind of an overview. Part of the basic premise with this score was to try to make music that feels like it's simultaneously from everywhere and from nowhere. It should feel folk-like and cultural, except not connected to an actual culture in our world. Rather than trying to go whole cloth and invent something completely from scratch, which would maybe be too distant or too unrelatable, I decided to conscientiously blend a lot of different cultures. It achieves the kind of from everywhere quality, I think, rather than feeling like something starkly foreign or starkly unfamiliar.
I think something that makes this melody so universal and embeddable is that it's mostly based off the pentatonic scale, which is one of the oldest means we as humans have of measuring sounds. Yeah, there are more than 5 notes used here. You develop it beyond just the scale, but the relationship, the pentatonic relationship, has influenced so many genres of music from cultures all over the world.
I can't say that any of that is intentional in an overly intellectual way, but you're absolutely right, and the fact that so many folk songs and hymns and things like that throughout every culture in the world are rooted in the pentatonic scale makes it no coincidence that you would find a lot of connectivity between that and a melody here. In fact, I think that's just probably a common thread in most all of my melodic writing.
Something about this melody sounds familiar, even though I know you just wrote it. It's just particularly effective at communicating to me, even before I've played the game.
It's interesting because as a composer, the goal is always to make something new, but the truly new, as defined by like the avant-garde, is going to be by its very nature very alien and unfamiliar and probably off-putting as a result. So many of our musical traditions are all about very slow incremental steps as we toy with increasingly creative harmonies or colors or melodies, and our instruments get more adept at handling kind of more wild expressions, that kind of thing. So a lot of composers, myself included, have come to realize that grounding your material in the familiar, in something that might feel intuitive, is a key way in order to kind of smuggle truly new information in. It's a tough balancing act because sometimes we get bored with our own material and then we remember, oh wait, they still haven't heard it yet. 20 seconds into the piece, we might already be representative of 100 hours of work as a composer, but for the audience, it's 20 seconds. We have to never lose touch with that, and so keeping things feeling, as you say, familiar is often the goal. All that is even more true in the case of a game like Pathless, where, as I said earlier, it's meant to feel connected to the natural world, even though it's very much a poetic and mythical experience in the spirit of things like Abzu and Journey. I didn't want it to feel so ethereal or transcendent, so existential. Any of these kinds of words to describe Abzu, I think there needs to be a contrast with Pathless, despite the fact that it's still also a playable fairy tale or a playable myth.
Something else neat about this melody is how it compares to Abzu's main theme on oboe. That theme starts with a long, expressive note, and it favors smooth, step-based motion up and down, and it only notably leaps once. And it's perfect for oboe, an instrument that can blend notes together. It sounds like the motion of water. Meanwhile, this pathless melody starts up more readily, and it can repeat notes and leap more often to make it quirkier, and it references a more concrete rhythm. While Abzu was a contemplative movement, the pathless is a deeply rooted song.
I think that that's probably true, but I can't say I did either of those themes consciously that way. Sometimes I'm thinking about a project and I just find myself hearing a melody, or I sit at the piano and I kind of fiddle around for a few minutes and very quickly something emerges out of that. And in this case, for both the Pathless and Abzu, the melody that forms the main theme was my first attempt at the main theme. But I don't chalk that up to anything on my end. That's not compositional brilliance. That's the power of the game. It's the power of Matt's vision to so beautifully crystallize something that when I'm trying to grab that thing, whatever it may be, a melody just tumbles out of it. It's like something that somehow pre-existed, and I'm simply catching it in the wind, and then I get the absolutely bizarre good fortune of being able to say I wrote it, when in reality it's more like I transcribed it from the universe. Does that sound pretentious enough? Hopefully not too much. But I do mean the spirit of that. It should feel like it somehow already existed, and if I spend my time forcing it, it will for sure never feel that way.
Now, how will that song be implemented? In Abzu, you used audio middleware to create seamless transitions in your music that align with what happens in the game. Do you plan to do that again in the Pathless?
So, thank you for asking about implementation, because it's one of the great overlooked subjects with regard to game music. And I can just say again, to anybody who's seeing this on my channel that's not familiar with your channel, they absolutely have to go check it out, because you have done some pretty awesome videos showcasing how music actually functions in games, not least of which was your Abzu video, which I thought you did an absolutely brilliant job on, specifically on this subject of showing how it works and trying to kind of demystify some of the technical aspects. How we're doing it in Pathless is a huge question that bears its own further analysis and examination because it's just so complicated. The game is a largely open world type format, which leads to all kinds of interesting technical challenges. I will be writing blog posts and doing videos covering it in a lot more detail, so I'm going to put a pin in it for now if you'll indulge that.
Well, this has been a wonderful look into your approach for this game. I know it's still being developed, but I'm really excited to hear more about this. How can I follow the development process, and how can I stay up to date with your work?
Well, that is very kind of you to team me up with. I will be rolling out a series of blog posts and YouTube videos in anticipation of the release of the game. I'm going to try to kind of tackle each section and each subject individually, like the instrumentation, the musicians, the in-game implementation, the nature of the large-scale recording sessions that we've done, all of that. And so if they just stick around right here, I'll have all the information in the description below and on my channel just in general moving forward.
For any of my viewers who have come over, make sure you check out the rest of Austin's YouTube channel. He's got behind-the-scenes videos, music announcements, interviews, all sorts of stuff. If you have the time, I really recommend his text commentary on his score to Journey. It gives a lot of insight into his inspirations while you listen to this great soundtrack.
And seriously, again, Scruffy, thank you so much for helping with this, but also for that just unbelievable video about Abzu. The level of depth and yet how briefly and quickly you managed to communicate it just astounds me. So I really can't thank you enough. It was a beautiful kind of emotional reminder of how much I loved that game and how much I loved working with that team and how hard we worked to do what we did. Sometimes you never know if any of it worked or came together, and your video was a little feeling of victory, so truly thank you.
Thank you very much, Austin. And yes, if you want to learn more about the soundtrack of Abzu, I have a large analysis video on my channel. The link is in this video's description.